6:15 a.m. No one calls his name. No one looks at him. No one asks where he's from. Jeremiah crosswalks along the sidewalk on Grandview Avenue, his old military boots so worn that the cold stones press through the soles like knives, stabbing into the arches of his feet. His eyes are cast low, his back hunched, as though the weight of a past no one wants to remember is pressing down on each vertebra. The early morning wind strikes his face like a slap, carrying the smells of exhaust trash and something like rust, the scent of time decaying amidst streets, not meant for those who once sacrificed. Beneath the tattered old wool cap, his face is a map of war. Deep scars, sunburnt skin from years of exposure, and eyes that no longer search for hope, but instead scan for danger. He strolls past the closed bakery St. Augustine's Church and stops beside a trash can at the 3rd Street corner. A small dog steps out from the shadowy corner, one ear torn, its fur matted with dirt. "Eat, Bravo," he whispers, placing half a cold loaf of bread next to the trash can. The dog barks softly, grabs the bread, then nuzzles its head against his hand, as if to thank him. Jeremiah smiles faintly, a gesture almost forgotten long ago. "Same place tomorrow, got it," he says, adjusting the tattered canvas backpack once used to carry ammo, now filled with a few cans and a spare jacket. He turns and heads down Claymore Avenue. No one stops him. No one asks his name. No one knows that he once was a Special Forces sergeant trained to rescue hostages under enemy fire, to march through hot sand, to honor a vow to his country. Now he is a problem, a shadow drifting through the city, easily dismissed, forgotten, and handcuffed. He doesn't need anyone to see him. Being invisible is a freedom, but it's also a kind of death sentence, one that just hasn't been handed down yet. The clock strikes 07 as he reaches the corner where Mason's grocery store sits. He steps inside. A small bell rings, and the world begins to fall apart just because he dared to walk in as if he were still a person. The air inside Mason's grocery store was thick with a mix of cheap cigarettes, melting plastic from the old cash register, and the lingering scent of oil from the chip bags. Jeremiah walked up to the counter, pulled out a dollar bill and 38 cents each coin, carefully counted since early morning, and placed them on the counter. A bottle of water, the old kind. He said, his voice raspy from time and years of silence. Behind the counter was Travis Halberd White, 32 years old, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, his face twisted in a grimace from a rent call ending less than 2 minutes ago. The anger still simmered in his chest, and now it needed somewhere to spill over. Travis looked at Jeremiah, then at the loose change on the counter, as though it were a contagion. "Price went up," he said coldly. Jeremiah frowned, trying to keep his voice calm. "I bought it at this price yesterday." "Well, today's different," Travis growled. "Get out of my store before you scare my customers." "All right," Jeremiah replied quietly, reaching for the loose change. But Travis slammed his hand down on the counter, then grabbed Jeremiah's wrist with a force more potent than his appearance suggested. "Don't try anything," he shouted. "You think this is some kind of charity?" Jeremiah lifted his head a moment, the eyes that once looked through a scope in the dust of battle, now locked with Travis's gaze. Calm, fearless, but not leaving. A young customer in the corner of the store looked up, hesitating. "Let go of me." Jeremiah's voice was soft, but carried the resonance of command, the same tone that once made soldiers halt in the midst of gunfire. Travis didn't release him. Instead, he shoved Jeremiah so forcefully that he toppled onto the snack shelf bags of chips, spilling across the floor. "You filthy black bastard." Travis snarled words like a blade cutting straight through Jeremiah's dignity. Jeremiah rose. No resistance, no retaliation. But his posture had shifted. No longer the hunchbacked homeless man, but a warrior who knew what it was to face life and death. Travis pulled his phone from his back pocket and dialed. 911. A black guy is attacking me in my store. He's got a knife. He's threatening to burn my store down. Outside, the sky was lighter, but the storm was coming from another direction. From the sirens of the patrol cars rushing toward him, from the boots of officers about to stomp on the dignity of a man. And Jeremiah knew well no battlefield was more dangerous than the one where skin color was a weapon for accusation. Less than 10 minutes after the call, the East Point Police Department patrol car stopped in front of Mason's store. Before the wheels had fully stopped, 3 officers jumped out. The first was Sergeant Brent Callahan White, 44 years old, with a potbelly, but walking like the badge on his hip was a divine decree. Behind him were 2 younger officers, Ryan Deeks, White 27, and Anthony Vega, Latino, 31. The only one in the group with eyes that seemed to observe rather than judge. "That's him," Travis yelled, running outside and pointing at Jeremiah, sitting silently on the bench beside the store wall, his hands resting casually on his knees, as though he had been waiting for the storm to come. Brent looked at Jeremiah, his gaze instantly hardening. "Get up!" He barked, hand already on the gun at his hip, even though Jeremiah hadn't moved. "I'm not doing anything," Jeremiah said. His voice wasn't raised, but it was full of weight. "I'm sitting here waiting because I knew you'd come." "Cut the innocent act," Brent growled. "Stand up, turn around, hands on your head." Jeremiah complied. No hesitation. No words were spoken. Vega stepped back slightly, glancing at Deeks, who pulled out the handcuffs. "He's not resisting," Vega murmured. "He's still a threat," Brent snapped. "You think these guys need weapons to cause trouble? Their swagger is enough to be considered a threat." Deeks slapped the cuffs on Jeremiah without any further warning. Jeremiah's head lightly hit the edge of the car door as he was shoved into the back seat. He didn't groan. He just gently closed his eyes. Across the street, a young black woman, Ava Richardson, had already positioned herself, phone raised, recording. "He didn't do anything," she said, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "I've been here since the beginning. He just bought water." Callahan approached her, his gaze cold as ice. "Give me the phone." "No." Ava stepped back. "I know my rights." In a swift motion, Deeks stepped forward, yanking the phone from her hand and throwing it onto the sidewalk, where the screen shattered. Vega hesitated, seeming ready to say something, but then fell silent. "Back to the car," Brent ordered. Jeremiah was locked inside the police car, now nothing more than a mobile cage called prejudice, and the journey from being invisible to being branded began at that moment. Outside, the sun shone brightly, but no light reached inside that car where the law wore the mask of justice, and the person in uniform wasn't always representing what was right. At the East Point police station, Jeremiah was shoved into the holding cell like any other nameless suspect. His old clothes were confiscated, leaving a 62-year-old man in an oversized t-shirt, his hands marked with red from the handcuffs that were too tight. The dried blood on his temple had yet to be wiped away. Brent Callahan sat in the records room, twirling a pen between his fingers, his eyes glancing over Jeremiah's blank file with a smirk. No record. No valid ID. Brent muttered, "Guess that means he doesn't exist." Deeks nodded. "I'll handle the evidence." In another room, Jeremiah's battered backpack was opened. Deeks pulled out a folding knife, something that had never been inside it. He shoved it into the inside pocket, then took a bottle of unlabeled pills containing white tablets and slipped them into the side compartment. "Evidence for illegal weapon possession and controlled substances," he murmured, writing a new label, "Found in suspect's backpack." Brent tapped away on the keyboard, creating the arrest record in the system. Suspect engaged in public disturbance, resisted arrest, and possessed illegal weapons and controlled substances. No ID found homeless status signs of mental instability. Each word was chosen carefully like a blade cutting away the past. Brent didn't care who the man had once been. What mattered was that he fit the label, a new name to be logged in the department's record, a cheap victory but costly for the budget. In the corner of the holding cell, Jeremiah sat on the metal bench, eyes shut, but his mind was wide open. He could hear the lock click shut, the sound of police boots scraping on the floor outside, and the faint laughter from the break room, familiar sounds that once echoed through military barracks, now reverberating like the laughter of demons. Vega approached the cell door, hesitated, then looked inside. "Who are you?" he asked without threat, just a genuine question. Jeremiah opened his eyes, a flash of a gaze as sharp as a blade. Then it returned to the harmless expression of a homeless man. "I used to be the one they called the silent killer," he said quietly. "But now they just call me by my inmate number." Vega froze. He wanted to ask more, but Callahan stepped up his voice. "Cold Vega handle the background check. Ask him if there's anyone we should notify." "Although," Brent smirked, "I doubt anyone cares." Jeremiah gave a faint, bitter smile. "Family." They disappeared when I was no longer called a hero. Vega lowered his head and walked away. Deep within the legal system, a name was added to the waiting list for trial. Jeremiah Cross. No home, no past, no identity. Only the charge. And his silence. Fulton County. Justice Building. Basement 07:45 a.m. Amira Jordan, 28 years old. Justice, in worn-out shoes, rushed through the holding cell door with an untouched cup of coffee and a heavy briefcase full of files. She had been a public defender for 3 years, but each day here made her feel older by a few years. A freshly printed file on the desk before her still smelled of ink. Jeremiah Cross. Male. No residential address. Charges: resisting arrest. Possession of a weapon. Possession of controlled substances. Amira narrowed her eyes when she saw Brent Callahan's name on the report. Him again. She recalled 3 recent cases he'd handled: an elderly man with dementia, a young man whose arm had been broken, and a single mother crying behind bars for assaulting an officer with her handbag. "Jeremiah Cross," she said to the coordinator. "I need to see him. Now. Interrogation room 04. Jeremiah sat there motionless, arms crossed over his chest. His face was scratched, but his eyes were like an endless well. Cold, but not lifeless. Amira hesitated as she opened the door. A thick air, not the smell of body odor, but the weight of history. Something unnamed. "I'm Amira Jordan, the appointed public defender," she said, opening her briefcase. "I'm here to help." Jeremiah didn't respond. "I know the charges against you are severe, but I also know the signs of a setup when I see one." She paused, and here everything is screaming, "Frame job!" He just looked at her. Not angry, not panicked, just observing. "You served in the military, didn't you?" she asked, opening the intake report. "That scar. Your posture. The way you watch me. I see that in veterans." Jeremiah blinked. Very slowly. Amira lowered her voice. "They say you had a knife, but no fingerprints. They say you had drugs, but no prescription or blood test. They say you resisted, but no cameras, no independent witnesses. Just the word of 3 officers, the same ones with a history of false testimony in internal investigations I've dealt with before." Jeremiah took a deep, steady breath. Then for the first time he spoke. "If you help me, they'll break you." His voice was hoarse, but each word felt like a nail driven into the air. "I know," Amira replied. "But I'm not here to bow my head. I'm here to look them in the eye. Jeremiah looked directly into her eyes for the first time. A flicker of something not trust, but no longer denial, glimmered in those dark eyes. Amira closed the file and stood up. "I'll be back. And next time I want you to tell me the truth. All of it, no omissions. If you still think this world is worth fighting for." Jeremiah nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. But for Amira, that was enough. Brent Callahan stood against the wall outside the hallway, sneering when he saw her walk out. "Saving another homeless guy, Jordan." She didn't answer, only stared at him, as if she already knew exactly who he was and what he would do. A storm was coming, but this time, it wouldn't pass quietly. Fulton County Jail, Interrogation Room, 04, 08:17 a.m. The air in the room felt thick, almost suffocating. Jeremiah Cross sat upright, his eyes fixed on the wall before him as if observing an invisible battlefield. Amira Jordan placed the tape recorder on the table. "I've requested data from previous arrests by Callahan. 3 of them show discrepancies in reports and lack video evidence." Jeremiah remained silent. She wasn't in a rush. She had learned that people like him, those who had been through battlefield's betrayal and being forgotten, didn't answer out of politeness. They only spoke when what they were about to say had life or death importance. "You were a soldier," Amira said. "I need you to confirm that so I can access your military records. Right now, all the data about you is blank. No history, no medical records, not even an ID photo. It's like you've never existed." Silence. Then he sighed. Not the tired sigh of a man worn down, but like someone about to turn over a piece of memory full of sharp thorns. "I am Sergeant Major Jeremiah Cross," he said. "3rd Battalion Covert Special Operations Unit, temporarily attached to the Joint Middle East Forces, known as Ghostfire." Amira paused. That name, she had heard it before, vague, secretive, only mentioned in leaked Pentagon documents. Jeremiah continued, his voice steady and low. "We left no trace, no name tags, no insignia. When the mission ended, we returned and were erased from the system. If we failed, we disappeared forever." Amira shivered. Late in 2007, he continued, "We were ordered to recall documents related to a failed arms operation in Kandahar. But what we found wasn't a shipping error. It was evidence showing that a group of high-ranking U.S. officials had diverted a weapons shipment to rebel factions to create a false war to maintain military funding." He paused, his gaze now focused on the table. "We were ordered to destroy all documents and witnesses." His voice was now like cold steel. "And you refused?" Amira asked quietly. "Not just me." Jeremiah looked at her. "My entire team. 6 of us. We copied the documents and hid them in a secret archive on the outskirts of Jacksonville, under the name Supply Depot Number 12. 3 days later, 2 of my teammates committed suicide. 1 died in a car accident. 1 disappeared. It was just Silas Gray and me, my second-in-command, left. But he sold me out to get his name erased from the list of the dead. And you were dishonorably discharged, numb. I was erased." Jeremiah laughed bitterly. "My records were classified as top secret. My name was removed from the veteran list. My wife was told I died in an explosion. Meanwhile, I was locked up in a military detention facility for 9 months for mental instability. When I was released, the house was seized, my daughter placed in foster care." Amira clenched her fists. "And after that I survived. In the dark. A shadow. No citizenship, no family, no name. Until yesterday, when Callahan kicked my head to the curb like an animal." She exhaled, unsure if it was from fear or respect. "There's one thing you should know," she said, leaning forward. "I've contacted an investigative journalist. He's also tracing arrest records related to Callahan. There have been 4 cases of disappearances from the holding cells without leaving a trace." Jeremiah squinted. What's the journalist's name? Marcus Flint. Silence. Then he nodded slightly. Good. Flint wrote an article about how Silas was reinstated, despite a history of military misconduct. He's trustworthy. Amira turned on the recorder, pressing stop. Mr. Cross, she said, I need you to agree to let me present this case to the Federal Military Disciplinary Board. We can force them to restore your identity, if we survive long enough. Jeremiah looked at her for the first time, a slight spark in his eyes. You've crossed the line. You know that, right? Amira smiled faintly. I never believed in borders. Only in right and wrong. She stood up. We won't let the past be buried any longer. He looked up at her, his voice steady and sure. Then let's start digging it up. 9:37 p.m. Fulton County Sheriff's Office. Internal Affairs Chief Gregory Vance placed the thick file on Sheriff Linda Mercer's desk. 3 disappearances. All are linked to Callahan's Task Force 77C. And this is the 4th. Mercer glanced briefly at the file cover. Jeremiah Cross's name stood out at the top. Vance. I can't launch a full investigation on a gut feeling. We're in the middle of an election cycle. Exactly. Because we're in an election cycle, Vance said, lowering his voice. If this breaks, you'll be caught in it. Linda closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, her gaze was as cold as steel. I need evidence. Not intuition, not speculation. Evidence. 08:00 a.m. The next day, Georgia State Law School. Aaliyah Cross, a third-year student, froze when she saw the name Jeremiah Cross appear on her phone screen. She had erased that name from her heart since she was 12. The father had once been a hero and then disappeared without a trace. The police said he had mental issues. The school called her the daughter of a failed soldier. But now, an email from a woman named Amira Jordan had made everything fall apart. We need to talk about your father, about the truth. Holding cell 10:45 a.m. While Jeremiah quietly ate the stale bread, a young officer, Jackson Miles, approached. You cross? He asked quietly, his eyes watchful of the camera on the ceiling. Jeremiah gave a slight nod. Miles pulled a folded paper from his pocket and slid it under the food tray. I served in Al-Basra, Logistics Protection Team. You probably don't remember me, but I heard you call the evacuation when the base was shelled. I was only 19 back then. Jeremiah looked at the young soldier, his gaze as still as ashes. I think I've heard that voice in my dreams for years, Miles said softly. You don't deserve to be locked up here. And as for Callahan, I won't say anything, but I won't stop that lawyer from finding a way out. 02:00 p.m. Baylight Chronicle Office. Investigative reporter. Marcus Flint sat in his messy office, holding the leaked file Amira had sent him. The image of Jeremiah Cross in military uniform, blurry but distinct, pieced together from old satellite data and a 2008 leaked report. Notable detail. A mission called Operation Silent Ember. Never declassified, never a recorded survivor. This man wasn't just a soldier, Flint murmured. He's the last person from a chapter ripped from history. He picked up his phone, dialing Amira. I'm going to make a move, but you have to protect him. What I'm about to do will get us noticed. 05:15 p.m. Sheriff's Office. A secret meeting between 3 people. D.A. Troy Caldwell, Judge Milton Reeves, and Sheriff Mercer. Flint's about to drop the story, Mercer said. If there's audio or documents, we can't stop him. We might not stop him, Reeves said in a low voice, but we can blur it. D.A. Caldwell rested his chin on his hand. What about Jeremiah Cross? Mercer glanced at the documents. No record, No criminal history, no federal warrants. But he has a daughter. Reeves nodded slightly. Hit the weak spot. Is she studying law? Cancel her scholarship? Apply pressure throughout the school. Simple. And what about lawyer Jordan? I'll handle it, Mercer said, standing up. A flat tire, a stolen hard drive. She'll be worn out before she files any motions. At the same time, at Amira's apartment. The window was shattered. The laptop is gone. The USB containing the evidence was taken. A note was stuck to the wall with a dagger. Next time it'll be blood. Don't dig up graves. Amira didn't cry. She only pulled out a backup USB from her coat pocket, which she always kept hidden close to her. At the bottom of the chalk box, just behind the mirror. She knew that when the system starts threatening individuals, it means the truth is about to reach its heart. 6:00 a.m. Atlanta. Interstate Bus Station. Aaliyah Cross sat on the back bench, gripping her small backpack tightly. Her eyes were fixed on the scan of her mother's final journal entry. Jeremiah said that if anything happens, find a woman named Amira Jordan. And don't trust official paperwork. The daughter of a man who had been erased by the system. Aaliyah knew one thing. The truth was always hidden where few would look outside of the law. 08:30 a.m. Small coffee shop. Decatur suburbs. Amira. Jordan slid a coffee cup across the table toward Marcus Flint, her face composed, but unable to hide the urgency. You need to publish the article tonight, she said. Flint shook his head. I need confirmation on Jeremiah Cross's identity. Without it, I'm just some crazy guy making up a ghost soldier. Amira placed a paper bag on the table. Photos from the Ember operation and fingerprints match last year's leaked military data. And this, itchy. She pulled out a recording, is a radio excerpt between Jeremiah and his commander when he refused to leave civilians behind. Flint's tone grew serious. You know I'll be under surveillance once I publish, right? Amira nodded. I've been under surveillance since I chose to protect the truth. 10:00 a.m. Judge Milton Reeves's office. We're being pushed into defense mode, Reeves growled, tossing the printed version of the article that was spreading on social media onto the table. The bold headline read, Erased Records, The Truth About Ghost Soldier. Jeremiah Cross. Sheriff Mercer stood by the window, her gaze darkening. They've got pictures. They've got evidence. Now we've only got two options, either tighten control over the media or shut Jeremiah down completely before he gets to court. You mean, Reeves asked, his voice dropping. Make him violate prison rules. When there are no witnesses, everything becomes speculation. 12:45 p.m. Fulton County Jail. Holding cell. While Jeremiah silently ate the stale bread, a new officer, Lieutenant Raynard Mays, walked up. Cross Mays spoke, his voice controlled. Follow me. Someone wants to see you. Jeremiah glanced briefly at the cameras. All of them turned off. Quietly, he stood up and followed Mays down the hallway, bathed in harsh white light. But instead of heading toward the interrogation room, Mays suddenly shoved him into an empty holding cell, locking the door behind him. Inside, two large officers were waiting. Without warning, they pounced, beating Jeremiah savagely. But he didn't scream. He just clenched his fists and protected his face. Mays stood outside, turning away, but his eyes flashed with inner turmoil. At the same time, Amira's office. The doorbell rang. Aaliyah Cross entered, holding a USB delivered by a stranger named BM, the initials of a former soldier who had served with her father. What's on it? She asked, her eyes as resolute as the face of someone who had seen too much useless silence. Amira plugged the USB into her computer. A series of files appeared. Among them were satellite images confirming the existence of Operation Ember body cam footage from a quietly unnamed officer, Raynard Mays. An audio file proving Jeremiah had saved over 20 civilians and refused to destroy the evidence. Amira asked Aaliyah, "Do you want to bring this truth to light? Or should I?" Aaliyah tightened her grip on her backpack, her eyes shining. "It's my father. I'll do it. I'll..." 05:30 p.m. Atlanta City Hall. Flint and Amira stepped onto the podium at an unofficial press conference in front of over 300 veterans and independent journalists. They played footage of Jeremiah from the battlefield, an audio clip of his voice saying, "They're civilians. We don't leave people behind. I refuse that order." A hand shot up at the back of the auditorium. Former Army General Henry Dawes. "I served with him. I confirm his testimony." The auditorium erupted in applause. At the same time, Fulton Jail Medical Room. Jeremiah lay on the bed, his face bruised, his left eye barely able to open. But he whispered to the nurse, "Can you tell my daughter? I never gave up." The nurse gently took his hand, tears threatening to spill. "She knows already, sir. The whole world is about to know." 08:30 a.m. Fulton County Courthouse, Atlanta. It was a gloomy day. Thick clouds blanketed the courthouse like a premonition for a battle that wasn't just legal, but about honor life and buried memories. Outside, hundreds of people gathered, holding up signs. "Justice for Cross. No man left behind. Even at home we see you now." Inside, courtroom number 6 was packed. Journalists jostled. Numerous veterans in the full uniform sat up straight, like in a funeral procession. Their eyes focused on the defendant, Jeremiah Cross. He was brought into the courtroom wearing a navy blue suit. His face was swollen and bruised, his left eye nearly shut, but his gaze was sharp. Every step he took was heavy, but as firm as a soldier marching. 09:00. Opening of the trial judge. Eldon Whitaker, a white man in his 60s, known for his conservative views, entered. His eyes swept across the room before settling on Jeremiah. Something in his gaze shifted, a brief hesitation, then hardening again. The trial of Jeremiah Cross, with charges of assaulting a store employee, resisting arrest, possession of a weapon, and possession of drugs, begins. Assistant District Attorney Nadine Proctor stood up, her voice cold. "Your Honor, this is a man with a history of instability, homelessness, and a potential danger to the community." 09:35. Opening statement from the defense attorney. Amira Jordan stood. No notes. Just a determined gaze and a deep conviction. "Your Honor, Jeremiah Cross is not a homeless troublemaker. He is a veteran who served in one of the most elite units, a soldier who was betrayed by his own country after choosing to protect lives rather than cover up dirty secrets." She placed a photograph on the podium, Jeremiah in uniform holding a young girl during the 2007 mission. "Today, we are not just prosecuting a man. We are prosecuting the system that tried to erase him from history." 10:10. First witness. Tom Beckett, store employee. Beckett stepped up to the witness stand, his face confused. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he recounted the old story. Jeremiah had gone crazy, smashed things, and threatened to burn the store down. Amira slowly played the security footage. No smashing, no yelling. Just a man walking in, paying for a drink, then being refused and verbally thrown out with racist slurs. Amira turned to Beckett. "Anything else to add?" Beckett looked down. "I was asked to write that. They said he was dangerous." 11:00. Second witness. Lieutenant Raynard Mays. The room fell silent as Mays entered, the man who had led Jeremiah to the beating room. He stood straight, clearly torn. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice faltering. "I was part of the wrong. I was ordered to clean up the trouble. But when I saw Mr. Cross not resisting, not fighting back, I realized I was destroying a man who had never lost his dignity." He pulled out a USB. "This is a copy of the video from my body cam. It was never submitted due to a technical error. 11:45. Playing May's video. The courtroom held its breath as the video played. A brutal scene, Jeremiah being beaten, not resisting. A police officer's voice hissed, "We'll treat him like we treated the other heroes. No one cares about the homeless." Sheriff Mercer's voice rang out from the video as he turned his back. "Just make sure no one survives to tell the tale." At the back of the courtroom, some people began to cry. An elderly veteran whispered, "This happened to my sergeant. They're doing it again." 12:15, court break. The atmosphere shifts. Outside the courtroom, reporters rushed out like bees from a broken hive. News spread rapidly across social media. Police brutality and framing of veteran Cross revealed Cross's special ops identity, confirmed through Pentagon leaks. Jeremiah looked out the small window in the defendant's break room. He whispered, "They're listening now. This time, they're listening." 1:30 p.m., Fulton County Courthouse. The trial resumed in a completely different atmosphere. Whispers filled the air circulating through the gallery. Journalists from CNN, MSNBC, and even the BBC were present. Influential figures in law and veterans began pushing their way into the courtroom. At the prosecution table, Assistant District Attorney Nadine Proctor grew tense. She knew the trial had slipped beyond their control, but something more serious was unfolding. The USB that had just been played contained a video that Internal Affairs had never seen before. That meant someone had betrayed them. 1:45 p.m. Attorney Amira Jordan presents new witness, Dr. Harold Reese, an independent expert from the Forensic Academy. He held a thick file, his glasses low on his nose. "We've analyzed the head injury on Mr. Cross. An impact from behind caused the skull fracture. This doesn't match the testimony that he fell while resisting. Furthermore, the marks from handcuffs indicate he was restrained before the collision." A small gasp went through the courtroom. Reese didn't stop. And finally, a mild sedative was found in his blood. A tranquilizer that can only be accessed by law enforcement or the military. 2:10 p.m. Judge calls for a 15-minute break to cross-check evidence. During the break, Amira received a folded paper from a strange woman in a brown suit. On it, just one line. "Check Grady Mercer, 1970 account. Old military archive." Amira handed it to Elijah Stone, the journalist following the case from the beginning. In 10 minutes, he traced a Google Drive archive, encrypted but still unlocked. Inside a series of medical records, mission photos, tactical logs, and notably, Jeremiah Cross's original military files, including military ID. Accomplishments in the Red Echo mission. 2008. Medal of Honor nomination canceled at the last minute. Top secret report titled Whistleblower Activity. Subject, Sergeant Cross. 2:25 p.m. Trial resumes. Amira requests to present documents from an anonymous source judge. Whitaker hesitated. But under the media's pressure and the evidence's seriousness, he nodded. A series of file photos appeared on the large screen, Jeremiah standing with a group of Special Forces soldiers next to a helicopter. Then came the proposed Medal of Honor report, crossed out in red, by a high-ranking officer who now sat in the Department of Defense. The courtroom held its breath. 3:00 p.m. Surprise witness, retired Colonel Glenn Thompson. He was Jeremiah's former commander. Gray-haired, stooped, but his voice was still clear. "I ordered Jeremiah to destroy the files of a failed mission due to an error by the military contractor. He refused and chose to protect the evidence. After that, all the files were deleted. I was cowardly. I kept quiet. But I won't stay silent anymore." 3:30 p.m. Before the trial ended that day, Judge Whitaker unexpectedly spoke. Based on the new evidence and the witnesses presented, I order to open an independent federal investigation into the misconduct in the case of Jeremiah Cross. He paused, looking directly at the prosecution. And I recommend the Department of Justice consider prosecuting the individuals involved in framing and using unlawful violence against a U.S. citizen. 4:00 p.m. Sheriff Mercer resigns in silence. The police department is under internal investigation. Outside the courthouse, chants erupted. Justice for Jeremiah. No veteran left behind. End police corruption. Elijah opened his phone. An email from a CIA whistleblower appeared. You don't know the whole story. Jeremiah Cross was part of a project erased from history called Deep Recon 12. And he's not the only one who's been silenced. Elijah looked up. The wind blew a stack of files from his hands. But now, the real storm was beginning. 08:15 a.m. Fulton Legal Aid Center. Amira Jordan's office. In the soft, early morning light filtering through the curtains, Amira opened the special folder labeled Cross Phase 3. Inside was everything scanned data, from a secret drive restored military photos, Colonel Glenn Thompson's testimony, and the unreleased video in which Jeremiah led a mission to rescue civilians threatened by mercenaries. She looked at the board filled with connections. Grady Mercer, Assistant D.A. Proctor, the Eastern Federal Court, and a string of similar cases to Jeremiah's over the past 7 years. An organized network emerged like a web intentional systemic. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was Elijah Stone. Amira. They know. I'm being watched. Where are you, Lincoln Park? The quiet area. I have a copy of the recording from the internal officer in the department. Grady knows about Jeremiah and has been taking orders from the Department of Homeland Security. And the worst part, what Jeremiah isn't the only one they've targeted. 09:00 a.m. Inside the security detention room, Jeremiah writes a letter by hand. The pencil had long been broken, but he still held it like a symbol. On the paper is a message to Aisha, his daughter. I don't know if I'll have enough time to see justice take shape, but if you read this, know that the man society forgot once stood in the middle of hell to protect nameless lives. He folded the letter and tucked it into the edge of his shoe, a place few would think to check. 10:30 a.m. Elijah Stone posts, Video on Truth Signal, a censorship-free platform title. They knew, and they stayed silent. Jeremiah Cross's case is not unique. In the video, the original audio from the internal officer, a recorded conversation in Sheriff Mercer's office. I was given orders from above. People like Cross, they're a risk to the order. If we don't clean them up, they'll bring up the wounds the system's trying to hide. The video spread quickly. Less than 3 hours later, the hashtag Justice for Jeremiah trended to #1 on Twitter. Veteran organizations, human rights groups, and even former CIA officers began sharing information about Deep Recon 12, a program hidden for nearly 2 decades. 1:00 p.m. Federal Court. Last day of the trial. Amira entered the courtroom with a calm expression, but her eyes were like fire. Beside her, Jeremiah, no longer the homeless defendant, but the former Special Sergeant Jeremiah Cross, wearing a neatly pressed uniform prepared by a group of volunteer veterans. When called to the stand, Jeremiah looked around the room. Some people had once avoided his gaze on the street. Some reporters had written articles calling him a dangerous drifter. But today, he did not lower his head. Jeremiah began his final statement. I'm not standing here to be pitied. I'm standing here to reclaim what should never have been taken from me, the truth. I carried a weapon for this country. I pulled wounded comrades from the line of fire. I refused to destroy evidence of the crimes the system wanted to forget. And in return, I lost everything. My wife, my daughter, my name. His voice lowered. But I won't be silent. Not today. Not ever. 3:30 p.m. The court concluded the final arguments. The judge postponed the verdict until the next morning. As Jeremiah stepped out of the courtroom, he was surrounded by dozens of veterans and supporters. An older man in a wheelchair, a retired lieutenant colonel, saluted in military style. They can erase your record, but they can't erase your honor. Jeremiah slowly raised his hand in return, his eyes moist but steadfast. 07:30 a.m. Federal Court Square. The sky that day was clear with no clouds. Hundreds of people gathered in the early morning, holding banners. Justice for Jeremiah. We see you now, erase corruption. Not heroes. Veterans. Law students, journalists, clergy, and even homeless people Jeremiah had quietly helped were present. On social media, a live stream from Elijah Stone garnered over 1.2 million viewers. 8:45 a.m. Inside this courtroom. The air was suffocating. Judge Mattingly sat high on the bench, scanning the crowded room. Below, Jeremiah sat beside Amira Jordan and Elijah. Amina Cross, now a senior law student, gripped her father's hand, her eyes burning with intensity. Mattingly tapped his gavel. The trial of Jeremiah Cross, charged with assaulting a store employee, resisting arrest, possessing weapons and drugs, and inciting a riot, begins. Assistant District Attorney Nadine Proctor stood up, her voice cold. Your Honor, this is a man with an unstable history, homeless, and a potential threat to the community. 09:35 a.m. Opening statement by the defense attorney. Amira Jordan stood up. No notes. Only a resolute gaze and deep conviction. Your Honor, Jeremiah Cross is not a troublesome homeless man. He is a former soldier, a part of the most elite unit, a man betrayed by his own country for daring to protect lives, rather than cover up dirty secrets. She placed a photo on the stand, Jeremiah in uniform, holding a young girl during the 2007 mission. Today, we're not just prosecuting a man, we're prosecuting the system that tried to erase his name from history. 10:10 a.m. First witness. Tom Beckett, store employee. Beckett stepped up to the stand with a confused expression. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he recounted the old story. Jeremiah had gone mad, destroyed things, and threatened to burn down the store. Amira slowly hit play on the screen. The security footage played. There was no destruction, no shouting. Just a man entering, paying for water, then being denied and verbally thrown out with racist slurs. Amira turned to Beckett. Do you have anything to say? Beckett lowered his gaze. I was told to write that. They said he was dangerous. 11:00 a.m. Second witness. Lieutenant Raynard Mays. The room fell silent as Mays stepped forward. He had been the one to lead Jeremiah to the torture room. He stood tall, clearly torn. I'm sorry, he began, his voice trembling. I was part of the wrong. I was ordered to clean up the mess. But when I saw Cross not resist, not fight back, I realized I was destroying a man who never lost his dignity. He pulled out a USB drive. This is a copy of the video from my body cam. It was never submitted due to a technical issue. 11:45 a.m. May's video played. The courtroom held its breath as the video played. A brutal scene, Jeremiah being beaten, not fighting back. A police officer growled, "We'll treat him like we treated other heroes." No one cares about the homeless. Sheriff Mercer's voice could be heard in the background, though he was turned away. Make sure no one survives to tell the tale. Some in the courtroom began to cry. An elderly veteran whispered, "This happened to my sergeant. They're doing it again." 12:15 p.m. Court breaks for 15 minutes. The atmosphere changes. Outside the courtroom, journalists swarmed like bees. News spread across social media. Police brutality and frame-up of veteran Cross exposed Cross's Special Forces identity, confirmed by leaked Pentagon files. Jeremiah gazed out the small window in the defendant's lounge. He whispered, "They're listening now. This time, they're listening." 1:00 p.m. Federal Court. Last day of the trial. Amira walked into the courtroom with a calm face, but her eyes burned with fire. Beside her, Jeremiah, no longer the homeless defendant, but the former Special Sergeant, Jeremiah Cross, dressed in a proper uniform provided by a group of volunteer veterans. When called to the stand, Jeremiah looked around the room. Some people had once avoided his gaze on the street. Some reporters had written articles calling him a dangerous drifter. But today, he did not lower his head. Jeremiah began his final statement. "I'm not standing here to be pitied. I'm standing here to reclaim what should never have been taken from me, the truth. I carried a weapon for this country. I pulled wounded comrades from the line of fire. I refused to destroy evidence of the crimes the system wanted to forget. And in return, I lost everything. My wife, my daughter, my name." His voice lowered. "But I won't be silent. Not today. Not ever." 3:30 p.m. The court concluded the final arguments. The judge postponed the verdict until the next morning. As Jeremiah stepped out of the courtroom, he was surrounded by dozens of veterans and supporters. An older man in a wheelchair, a retired lieutenant colonel, saluted in military style. "They can erase your record, but they can't erase your honor." Jeremiah slowly raised his hand in return, his eyes moist but steadfast.